What's up, everybody? Welcome to the wire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I am Alex Barutha. Next to me is Jason Shebilske. Kirian is on vacation this week, so we wish him well. Today, we're going to talk about this week's action from around the league, including several injury updates. Then we'll talk about some waiver wire pickups and preview the week ahead, which features a pair of 5-game slates. But first, as most of you no, we have a new look here at RotoWire, and you can use the code YouTube15. That's all. That's all one word to get 15% off any RotoWire subscription. We have plenty of new and exciting WNBA content coming your way, and a subscription now gets you access to the RotoWire Football Draft Kit for free. And there are plenty of useful features to check out, including draft plans, pick suggestions, and insights on the rest of your league. I'm excited to test out the new app. I mean, I downloaded it. It looks amazing. Looks very sleek. Excited to try for my new leagues. And again, YouTube 15 will get you the best price for that. And as always, during today's show, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section, and we will get them answered. If you ask live, we'll get them answered on the show, but we'll also be active in the comments on YouTube afterward to provide any additional insight. All right, let's get to the weekly recap, Jason. 2 Saturdays ago, we had Breanna Stewart. She left a game against the Sparks, which at the time was just, this is a leg injury. We're not sure. They had to do some tests. We knew it wasn't like really serious, but more recently, I think on Wednesday, we got an official diagnosis. So what do we know now, Jason?
Yeah, so during last week's show, we knew that Stewie was hurt, but now we have more insight on the severity. So, New York announced Wednesday that she's dealing with a bone bruise in her right knee, and she doesn't yet have a timetable to return. Normally, these types of situations are roughly anyone's guess as to when the player will actually be back on the court. We know this from football. We know this from the NBA that coaches just oftentimes aren't super forthcoming with injury information when they don't have to be, because sometimes they just don't know what the medical diagnosis will be. However, head coach Sandy Brondello slightly tipped her hand last week. She seemingly suggested that her team hopes to get Stewart back by the end of August. Although New York remains in position to be the number 2 seed for now, the team has been in a bit of a tailspin recently, losing 4 of their last 5 games in which Stewart hasn't been fully available, including losses to Dallas, Connecticut, and Los Angeles, which is concerning because all of those teams are near the bottom of the standings. The Liberties certainly have talent outside of Stewart, as Sabrina Ionescu, Jonquel Jones, and Natasha Cloud are all healthy. And Emma Meesseman agreed to sign with the Liberty before Stewart's injury. So that signing is looking especially important given the recent state of the team.
Yeah, Ionescu and Jones, especially coming off a few big games. Past 6 games for Ionescu is 28, 7, and 5 with 1.7 steals. Jones just had 21, 9, and 4 with 2 steals and a block and a win over the Sun. Some other injury news, but so let's talk about like the postseason field. Caitlin Clark obviously been injured, struggled with injuries all season, but the Fever they're making some noise, Jason.
Yeah, heading into this season, Caitlin Clark notoriously, I believe, had only missed like 1 game since high school, so her availability was not a concern at all. But recently, the Fever seem to be finding their stride without Caitlin Clark, as she's missed significant time this year. They've had some ebbs and flows, but right now they've won 5 consecutive games to bolster their standing in the postseason race. If the season ended today, the Fever would be the 5 seed with Seattle, Las Vegas, and Golden State rounding out the picture. And then the Mystics, Sparks, Wings, Sky, and Sun would all miss the playoffs. It wouldn't be surprising to see that field stay basically the same once the postseason begins. But a team that has made some waves in my eyes recently has been the Sparks. The team largely struggled to begin the season, but I'm really intrigued to see whether Los Angeles can make a push over the next month now that Cameron Brink is back to full health.
Yeah, Cameron Brink being back is obviously huge. Like one of the best, I mean, rim protection presences in the entire WNBA. So that can change the entire outlook of your team. going forward. Well, let's talk about some people who want to improve their fantasy teams. So some waiver wire pickups. I know you have a center that you want to talk about who is expected to have an increased role, Jason.
Yeah, I mentioned Emma Meesseman earlier in the show, so let's start there. She's certainly worth picking up in active leagues where she is still available. She's rostered in just 12.3% of ESPN fantasy leagues, but I expect that number to grow significantly, especially after she handled a starting role against the Sun on Sunday. She played just 17 minutes in that matchup, which was her team debut, but she racked up 11 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds, and a block, showcasing just how efficient she can be, especially if Breanna Stewart's absence continues. Meesseman is one of those players who, even when Stewart was expected to be available, a lot of coaches around the league seem to express some exasperation that Meesseman joined the Liberty just because she's a talented player joining an already talented team. Once Stewart is back in action, it's not yet clear whether Meesseman's starting role will continue. But because Stewart's absence really at this point could stretch through the end of the fantasy calendar, because like if she's out until around the end of August, that would leave just about a week and a half left for her to play like for the end of the fantasy season. And that will be just during championship week. So Meesseman could be a rest of season contributor who could also really be a boost for teams looking ahead to the playoffs.
I mean, she's always been great per minute. Like the per 40-minute stats, you look them up every year. It's like basically all-star numbers if she played that much. So as long as she's getting increased minutes, certainly worth looking at in fantasy. So let's move on, Jason, to a standout player for the Dream who has gotten 2 consecutive starts.
Yeah, so for the past few weeks, Naz Hillmon of the Dream has had decent fantasy production, especially as a streaming candidate, but she's really reached another level over the past week. She's topped 30 ESPN fantasy points in 4 consecutive outings, the last two of which have been as a starter in Brittany Griner's absence. Hillman is rostered in 35.3% of leagues, a number that's risen quite a bit over the past week. But with the Dream firmly positioned in the playoff picture, they can presumably afford to give Griner more rest down the stretch, which should allow for Hillman to maintain her increased opportunities. Even before Hillman's recent outburst, she was putting up consistent double digit fantasy points off the bench. So even once Griner is back in action, Hillman could be a valuable asset in the fantasy playoffs, especially given Atlanta's favorable schedule during championship week. We've talked about this a little bit in the past because Atlanta's schedule during the fantasy championship includes 3 games against the Sun, 2 games against the Sparks, and a game against the Wings, all of whom are relatively favorable opponents for fantasy purposes. So if Hillman can maintain this sort of production down the stretch, she certainly seems to have the potential to be a league winner. We've talked a lot about the Dream as a whole, like target Dream players for that favorable stretch. Hillman could be that player who could really push you over the top.
I mean, she's a great rebounder, and this season she's expanded her range out to the 3-point line. So I mean, that just gives her more potential for scoring outbursts. So you have a lot of double potential there. Um, let's go with another waiver wire suggestion. You have a rookie that you're looking at, Jason.
Yeah, so Kieran and I will often talk about what we kind of unofficially refer to as Shakira Austin type players, for lack of a better word. And these are players who can rack up significant fantasy production in limited minutes. In recent seasons, Shakira Austin's availability has been slightly limited, but despite those limited minutes, she has maintained a strong level of fantasy production, especially just in per minute stats. One of those players who's emerging as one of those types of players is number 2 overall pick Dominique Malonga of the Storm. It's a bummer that Kieran isn't here to talk about her because I know that how much Kieran loves her style of play. But she has certainly shown glimpses of that role early this year, and she's seen slightly more minutes recently to put her firmly on the fantasy radar over the final month of the season. Over her last 5 appearances, Malonga has averaged just 19.4 minutes per game, but she scored at least 18 ESPN fantasy points in each outing, topping out at 32 fantasy points in a blowout win over the Sky on July 24th. Malonga has played at least 20 minutes in each of her last 3 outings, including 2 games that were decided by single digit margins. So her playing time seems to be trending up, and she seems to be working her way into a more consistent role in the rotation.
Yeah, there's a level of trust already there because her usage rate, which is 26.5, already one of the highest in the WNBA. She's already one of the best rebounders in the W. It's 13.7 boards per 40 minutes. It's excellent, obviously. She can block shots too. Like it's just I can understand why it's like definitely a Shakira Austin type player. It's like there's a fantasy value formula. Like high usage players, especially if they can block shots and grab rebounds, it's great per minute. So that's a pretty easy pickup to make.
Yeah, and
Um,
we'll talk about so often that like defensive stats in ESPN fantasy formats are so important because you get 2 points per steal and 2 points per block. So that's why a player like Dominique Malonga, even if she isn't seeing a lot of real life minutes, she's still really valuable for fantasy purposes. As is Cameron Brink, who recently returned from her absence. She's been on a minutes restriction, but because of her defensive production, she can really be a solid fantasy player.
so if fantasy managers out there, if they need a guard, who should they look to target this week?
Yeah, so we talked about Breanna Stewart's injury earlier in the show, but another superstar who remains without a timetable to return is Caitlin Clark. However, Aari McDonald of the Fever has really stepped up in her absence. She's still rostered in just 22.9% of leagues, despite having kind of a 2 or 3 week span of having elevated fantasy production. McDonald has logged at least 20 fantasy points in 7 consecutive appearances and is a big reason why the Fever have put together their recent winning streak. So look for her role to continue for as long as Clark is sidelined. We still don't have a timetable for Caitlin Clark's return, so it could be anywhere from like a week to potentially the end of August, similar to Breanna Stewart. So Aari McDonald is someone who could really step up as the fantasy season draws to a close.
Yeah, I mean she's a solid 3-point shooter, good on the assists and steals categories. So I mean it's impossible to actually replace Caitlin Clark's production, in real life terms. But McDonald is a pretty good match for maintaining a similar style of play. Let's go back to a center. So a center who is rostered in just 12% of leagues that can give fantasy managers a boost, Jason.
Yeah, so when we double up on a player in 2 consecutive weeks, you can tell that they're a player who is really worth rostering. A player we did mention last week is Iliana Rupert of the Valkyries, and she's worth including in this week's show as well. When we came on the air last week, she had appeared in just 2 games for the Valkyries, playing 15 and 22 minutes in those outings. However, her role has improved over her last 3 appearances as she's averaged 26.7 minutes per game while putting up at least 21 fantasy points in each of those outings. She's still rostered in just 12% of leagues, as you said. And given the injuries that have plagued Golden State in recent weeks, it wouldn't be surprising to see her be a key contributor for the team over the final month of the season as the Valkyries attempt to make the playoffs in their inaugural season.
He is a great shooter, for a center, I should say, and is not shy about launching up threes. So, I mean, solid rebounder, not amazing, but if you have that 3-point shot, you're tall, obviously, so you're gonna get your rebounds. There's a lot of potential for big pop games. Even if it isn't like massive minutes, right? You can still she hits 4 threes, grabs some boards, like it's a huge game.
Yeah, and with front court players who can shoot the three, that just adds a whole another element to their fantasy game because as we talked about with the defensive statistics, which tend to come naturally for front court players, if you can shoot threes, that's an extra point on top of the points that you're already scoring for the threes. So like every 3 point shot is a 4 point play in fantasy. So if she can continue to shoot well from beyond the arc, she has the chance to really rack up points in bunches.
Unfortunately, we have to talk about how the Chicago Skies play recently, Jason. They may not be playing well, but that does not mean that we cannot take advantage in fantasy.
Yeah, living in Chicago, it's definitely a rough time to be a Sky fan. They haven't had too much to watch recently as they've lost 8 consecutive games, and lately it's really felt like a win if they can keep a matchup within single digits. However, a player who has continued to perform well is Rachel Banham. It's been nearly a month since we've talked about her on the show, and she's rostered in just 19.4% of leagues. A caveat is that she is coming off of a performance against the Mercury on Sunday, in which she was held to just 7 fantasy points. But prior to that, she had recorded at least 30 fantasy points in 3 consecutive outings. Like the Sky as a whole, she could have some games where she simply struggles to get things going. There are some games where no one on Chicago can really get their shot to fall, and that includes Banham. But she has displayed decent upside in recent weeks and should continue to see plenty of playing time down the stretch.
Another prolific 3-point shooter. One of the most, in terms of just like straight up volume, makes 2.1 in 23 minutes a game, which is a ridiculous number. And like you mentioned, like that gives her a lot of boomer bust potential. But if you add her over the course of a week or two, it's bound to even out. So you're really it'll be fine, right? Over the long term or the medium term, however you want to classify that.
For sure. And after Courtney Vandersloot went down with her injury, I think we, along with a lot of people, expected that maybe Haley Van Lith would get more playing time down the stretch. She's a rookie, so it wouldn't be surprising like to see her develop. And I think that her time will come down the stretch. But Rachel Banham has really provided a spark for the team that even though they aren't winning games, a lot of times the reason why they're even somewhat competitive is because of Rachel Banham's abilities. So it wouldn't be surprising to see her continue to get basically as many minutes as she can handle as the season progresses.
Let's talk about one more rookie off the waiver wire, Jason.
Yeah, so rounding things out for our waiver pickups, we have a rookie with plenty of talent in Aneesah Morrow of the Sun. Uh, we just talked about the Sky. Morrow is a Chicago product who started her collegiate career at DePaul, was one of the best players in the nation, and then transferred to LSU, where she continued to have plenty of production. Since being drafted by Connecticut with the number 7 overall pick in this year's draft, she's had a somewhat inconsistent role, but in recent weeks, she has served as a starter in 4 consecutive games, while Olivia Nelson Adota has moved to the bench. In Morrow's recent stint as a starter, she's averaged 9.3 points and 9.5 rebounds in 22.5 minutes per game, and she's racked up at least 20 fantasy points in 3 of those 4 outings. Morrow is rostered in 39.3% of leagues, so she probably isn't available in those deeper formats out there, but she's at least worth seeking out since the Sun will likely prioritize her development late in their lost season. Olivia Nelson Adota does show some promise from time to time, but she's a little bit older from Morrow, so it just makes more sense that if Morrow is producing well for the Sun, that they'll continue to give like a bunch of minutes to Morrow while kind of phasing away from Nelson Adota.
There are not many players in the W that per 40 minutes are giving you 18 points, 14 rebounds, 1.7 steals, and 1.0 blocks. And that is what Morrow was doing. So, like you mentioned, she's rostered in a decent amount of leagues. There are also going to be plenty of people listening to this who are playing in shallower leagues. So there's a good chance he's out there. So keep that in mind. Yeah, just does not take much of a boost and roll to vault her fantasy value like very, very high. All right. Now, let's talk about the upcoming week. What is the first thing that stuck out to you when you looked at the schedule, Jason?
Yeah, so as a lot of people have pointed out in recent weeks and just throughout this whole season, the WNBA oftentimes will have an interesting schedule from a week to week basis, on a nightly basis. Just when games are scheduled, sometimes you'll have like a 5 game slate with 4 games scheduled to begin all at the same time. This week does have a little bit of an interesting schedule with 5 games Tuesday on a night that features 3 West Coast matchups. So for us Central Time Zone people, 9 p.m. If you're looking to watch some late night basketball, Tuesday is the night for you. But that night is followed by a 1-game slate on Wednesday and a pair of 3-game slates before the week closes out with a 5-game slate Sunday. Now, what this means for fantasy purposes is that most lineups will likely be naturally full on Sunday because with 5 games, you probably have enough players to fill your lineup spots. So it's best to prioritize streaming between Wednesday and Saturday. This week is especially important because it's the last week of the regular season in standard leagues. So if you're fighting for a playoff spot, you could really catch the opposing manager off guard if you're able to rack up like those streaming players earlier in the week, and then Sunday might come around and the opposing manager might basically have no way to catch up, which could potentially propel you into the playoffs if you're in that position.
Before we get to your most interesting game of the week, Jason, we got a question in the chat from Jeff. Any word on Rhyne Howard getting back?
Yeah, Ryan Howard is one of those superstar players like Breanna Stewart, like Caitlin Clark, who is simply out at this point with no timetable to return. Um, the the most clear cut news that we recently had came in mid July, saying that she would be out for the remainder of July. It's now August, and we really don't have many updates outside of her just being immediately ruled out on the Dreams injury reports. I would probably consider her a little bit closer to day than like just the out indefinitely uh, categorization as we're in the first half of August. But I wouldn't count on her being back at any point soon, unfortunately. For fantasy purposes, it's really frustrating because if you have her on your roster, yes, you can stash her on IR, but she probably can't really be dropped because with a player like even Breanna Stewart, if she is going to be out through the end of August, I probably wouldn't recommend dropping her. But there is a case to be made that if you just need the roster spot for the last week of the regular season and the first round of the playoffs, that Stewart should miss enough time that she will be out, that she could potentially be dropped. Um, with Ryan Howard, she could miss several more weeks, but she could also be back any day. Once we have word of her like returning to practice, I think that will help to provide a more clear cut picture. But unfortunately, right now it's still just kind of out indefinitely with the caveat that it could be somewhat soon.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like you meant, really the only indication of the injury that we have is that it was a hyperextended knee, and she kind of had to be helped off the court. And you're right to point out, like until we get a further update on exactly what the injury is, or she has returned to practice, or she's ramping up, or whatever verbiage they want to use, it's hard to say. I mean, to use a cross sport example, we saw Paul George last year in the NBA. He had a hyperextended knee. He sat out for a while. They did more testing. They're like, it's actually a bone bruise, and then he had to sit out longer. So until we get further testing, it's hard to know. And like you said, it's frustrating with such a high level player.
Yeah, an encouraging update that didn't really warrant a fantasy note on RotoWire is that Megan Hall reported yesterday that Ryan Howard was up getting some shots up before the game. Nothing too heavy, but just some light work with the staff. So it's encouraging to see her doing at least some basketball activities. But I would say probably at least another week or two sideline given that update because once she is getting closer to returning, they'll probably ramp up her workload. So she's doing some basketball activities, but not 5-on-5 by any means. So she still has some work to go.
There's always a process to these things. Shooting before the game, then it's like 2-on-2 drills, 5-on-5 drills, and then it's a real practice, and then it's that's just how it goes. All right, let's wrap things up with what you think is the most interesting game this week.
Yeah, so one of the most intriguing games this week for me comes Tuesday when the Fever and the Sparks face off. We talked about both of these teams earlier in the show and how well they've been doing recently. The Sparks, especially, have been pretty solid recently, with wins in 6 of their last 7 games, and that stretch includes victories over New York, Seattle, and Washington. Now, all 3 of those teams have had some slight inconsistency as of late, but Tuesday will provide a good test for Los Angeles, as the Sparks will meet a red hot Fever team that has won 5 consecutive games. So I think that this will be a good gauge of just where the Sparks are at with a month to play in the regular season. Right now, the Sparks are plus 240 on DraftKings to make the playoffs, and I expect that those odds could improve if Los Angeles can end Indiana's winning streak Tuesday. It makes sense that, like, if you win a game, your playoff odds would improve. But I think that this game will especially be a really strong benchmark for the Sparks to see where they're at and who they can compete with at this point in the season. Later in the week, the Sparks have a matchup against the Valkyries, another team that's dealing with a lot of injuries and has struggled more than usual lately. So the Sparks have a chance to really go from on the outside looking in to firmly in the mix for that 7 or 8 seed. So I think that this is really a make or break season, make or break week for Los Angeles. The next night, we'll have a game with significant playoff implications between the Aces and Valkyries. I believe that right now they're sitting at number 7 and 8 in the playoff picture. So this will certainly have big playoff implications for both teams. And the week will close out with yet another rematch of the 2024 WNBA Finals between the Lynx and Liberty. Even though New York is banged up, there should still be no shortage of meaningful storylines and entertaining action this week.
That'll wrap it up for us on the RotoWire WNBA show. Once again, you can use the code YouTube15 to get 15% off any RotoWire subscription. Like we mentioned at the top, lots of WNBA content that's new and exciting, and then the RotoWire Draft Kit also for free when you sign up. Great new app. Check that out. But I assume Kieran will be back with you next week, Jason.
Yep, we should be back with our normal cast and crew next Monday at 1 p.m. Central. So be sure to join us then.
Those guys will